It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is Ellen Michelle. Welcome to the show, Ellen.
Thanks, Tim.
So, Ellen, we always, as usual, we talk before the show, but could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and the sort of things you do as it relates to books?
Yeah, absolutely. So full-time, I am a freelance fiction editor. I specialize in speculative fiction genres, so that means primarily science fiction and fantasy, but also a little bit of crime and horror as well. And within those same genres, I'm also a publisher. So I just launched Constellate Publishing in November of last year with a digital e-zine project. So I publish short fiction digitally. It's a lot of fun.
Cool. How many stories do you put in? Are you putting in each issue or so? You call it an e-zine, so it's like a magazine, correct?
Yeah.
How many stories go in each one, though?
I publish one short story a month with cover art and additional illustrations, interview content, and some more back-end stuff. But the goal is that as I gain readers, the production will increase. So I have certain subscriber goals that once I reach those goals, then I'll bump it up and publish 2 stories a month. And then once I reach my next goal, I'll publish 3 stories a month and grow it that way. So the more readers I have, the more content I produce.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. And that way you can afford to, incrementally provide people with stuff. And the people who are with you all along will just see it keep getting bigger. That sounds great.
Yeah, absolutely. And my contributors are all paid on royalty too. So it makes it a lot easier for calculations and all the boring back-end business stuff to do it. But yeah, so as the readership increases, I can produce more content and I can also pay my contributors more, which is really the goal.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but Escape Artists podcasts is a market I've been looking at recently for short fiction. They're short story podcasts. So, every week or so, they release a podcast in each show. And it's a series. There's like 4 or 5 podcasts now, I think.
Okay.
There's one for each speculative fiction genre, basically.
That sounds awesome. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, and I interviewed the owner of that, or I'm not sure what his title is. Effectively, he runs the whole mess, Alistair Stewart. And I thought it was really interesting how their royalties have gotten to the point where they're considered a pro market. I mean, like that's got to be at least up there somewhere as goals, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The mandate of Constellate Publishing is essentially to support and promote local Canadian authors and artists and to pay them fairly, pay them what they're worth. So it's always the goal to be constantly increasing how much I'm paying my contributors. It's really important to me and my company's values to do that.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, as an author, even though not a Canadian author, so I would never appear in this, but I could appreciate that. I can appreciate that ethos,
Mm-hmm. I know so many indies, and I know that they struggle, and it's really hard to make it as an indie in this industry. So I'm just trying to do what I can to make that a little bit easier. And also, another one of the big goals for Constellate too is to be kind of a source for larger publishing companies to look for new talent. So one of my big goals is to have, some of the big 5 publishers poaching my authors. I would never have, there's often a clause in publishing contracts, first right of refusal.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily believe in that because, you know what, if my authors can do bigger and better things somewhere else with someone who has a bigger budget than I do, that's fantastic. They're succeeding, and I like to see that. And honestly, when they get super famous and publish all their books with them, their fans from those books are going to come back to my backlist. So everybody wins.
No, that's a great way of thinking about it too, because you can't you can't be grabby with the rights and stuff. But at least I don't think that is a good business model anymore. I mean, it might have been at one time.
The only exception to that would be with a series. So like when I actually do get to print books, if I'm publishing book 1 in a trilogy, I'd like to be able to complete the trilogy. But a lot of publishing contracts actually have first right of refusal on all work. And that's where it gets kind of iffy for me.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty fair. And I think many authors, maybe even the majority of authors, would want to at least do something like, would like to stick with a publisher for, I mean, I've heard of this many times on, between author friends and podcasts I've listened to where there was a whole, where in the reverse situation where one publisher didn't want the second book in a series, but they also didn't want to give up the first book in the series. It's that kind of thing.
Oh, that's brutal.
And that can be really
fair to the author.
Huh?
That's not fair to the author at all.
No, it's very rotten.
Don't like that.
Yeah. Though I don't remember exactly how the story ended, but that was a few years ago, and it was. I kind of hope more people are not doing that now, as far as on the publishing side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was an awkward way to say that. Anyway, so what brought you to publishing? What kind of stuff what got you into this business?
Oh, that's a good question. One I get asked a lot. And honestly, it was a very happy accident. I'll try and tell the story briefly, but I was about halfway through my undergrad degree. I was doing a double major in English and psychology, and psych just wasn't working out for me the way that I thought it would. So I decided to switch my focus to just English, and I thought maybe I'll transfer universities. Like, this would be a good time for me to do that. So I started doing some research into English programs at various local universities and some not so local. And through random clicking of links, I found myself on the publishing department website of Simon Fraser University. And the more I read, the more I fell in love with the idea of books as a career. I had always loved reading. I grew up reading, and I just never really thought of them as a career before until that moment. And within a week, I had applied for graduation from my current university, applied to transfer to SFU, and I was just getting it done. And that first publishing class I took at SFU, it felt like home. And now, in just a couple of weeks, I'm graduating from the Master of Publishing program at SFU. So it's definitely been a very happy accident.
Wonderful. That's the best kind of accident, of course.
Yeah.
So what I do have another question about just in general, because you've when you read submissions as an editor or a publisher, is there a difference between those two? Or are they kind of the same kind of, do you look for the same kind of things when you're editing and when you're publishing? Or when
That's
you're reading
a really good question. I would say there are some things that I look for in both, but they are very different, because when I'm doing my freelance editorial work, I'm less picky about genre specifics. Because with the e-zine, I'm very specific in the kinds of things that I want to publish, because I have a brand to maintain and things like that under Constellate. But when I'm working with clients on the freelance editing side, it's their brand that they're thinking about, right? So I'm not publishing that work. I'm just editing it and helping them get it to the best possible shape so that they can either query agents, query publishers, or self-publish, whatever they choose to do with it. So I'm a lot less picky on genre specifics, as well as where the manuscript is at. Because when someone is hiring me to edit their work so they can submit elsewhere, then it's probably in, somewhat rough shape, or maybe they just need a quick copy edit so they can self-publish. Like the level of edit that work needs varies a lot more. Whereas when I'm looking at things that have been submitted for me to publish, I'm looking for something that is in pretty good shape already that I can just do a quick copy edit for house style and get it out.
Oh, that makes sense. When I hired an editor, a freelance editor, I hired one of my former guests on this program, Tim Markwitz, who also is an author, and what he mostly did for me, because he did find a lot of errors to fix and a lot of things that needed to be cleaned up. But one of the best the things he really gave me is the confidence to publish that book, because I independently publish and I'm like, okay, when is this book going to be ready? That particular book was, something I was kind of afraid of putting out there. And so I kind of needed that, just, somebody else to tell me it was okay at some point. I mean, granted, I had people tell me it was okay, but somebody who was, a professional, semi-pro person, even though he wasn't actually going to publish the book, it was enough to get a vote of confidence there,
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for self-publishing authors, that's a large part of what your editor will do for you, is give you that confidence. Because either at the end of the edit, your editor will say, you know what, you should clean this up and then send it back to me for another round because, there was a lot of work. So maybe you might introduce errors while you're changing these other things. And then after that second round, you feel good about it. Or sometimes even after the first round, it's just a quick, clean copy edit. And then it's like, yeah, make these few changes and you're good to go. And that can really, give the self-publishing author a lot more confidence in putting their work out there, which is great. I love that part of my job.
Oh, it's nice on the other side too. Anyway, it's always a good feeling. Well, somebody actually liked my book. Wow. Now I should hope that people are going to keep enjoying, because I finally got this giveaway thing, and I finally given away a substantial number of copies of the first book in one of my series, and it's kind of scary because now I'm like, okay, when do the reviews start coming in?
Yeah, and will they buy book 2 after they've read book 1?
Yeah, exactly. Oh boy, yeah, I'm a little nervous, to say the least. But and enough about me. So as far as your approach to editing, how do you approach editing? Obviously, as every authors have to edit, editors also edit. What is the difference, do you think, between the two?
Well, that's the difference between an author editing their work and an editor editing an author's work, is that when you've written it, you can do a lot of the substantial and developmental kind of edits. You can probably point out some plot holes after you go through and do your first edit once the draft is done. But there are going to be a lot of things that you miss because you're so close to the work. You know the characters, you know the world, you know what's supposed to happen. And your brain can actually fill in some gaps that aren't there in the text because you know what it's supposed to say. So when you get an editor to look at it, or even a beta reader in some cases, it's a fresh set of eyes. They don't know the character and the worlds and the story as well as you do. So they're more likely to point out things that don't make sense, or plot holes, or, hey, this character had brown hair and now they have red hair. What happened there? Simple things like that even. And that can take a reader out of the story because it can confuse them. Well, this shouldn't be this way. So why is it? And it can distract their reading. So when you hire an editor, those are the things that they're looking for, and they can point out to you things that you won't see on your own because you know the story too well.
Yeah, that's absolutely kind of what I was part of what I was expecting to hear, because I have had this problem. I mean, I know I had that problem a lot when I was younger, especially because I started writing when I was a teenager. So when my first, 5 books were full of things that, okay, that's not how people talk. That's nothing, that's not the way people act, stuff like that,
Yeah.
And I also have run into this more recent issue where I'm coy with details. Kind of like, that's why my brother will say, you're being coy with this. You shouldn't say that. You say, like, you should just come out and describe what you mean, right? And say what's actually going on instead of holding back details, kind of thing, in some situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that sounds like an opinion thing, but go on. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it brings up something else, that being coy with details is sometimes really good. It's called foreshadowing. And that's a really, really effective tool to use in fiction. And this would be the difference between getting, say, your friend or your brother who isn't a trained editor, but maybe an avid reader or maybe a casual reader. The difference between getting someone like that to read your work and getting an editor to read your work. Because, your buddy might be able to point out a plot hole or two, but they won't be able to pick up on the more subtle things like foreshadowing. Whereas editors are trained to find those things and point them out and understand how they work and how they relate to other parts in the text. So you're going to get a lot more specific comments from an editor than, say, a beta reader or a friend who is a casual reader. And those are absolutely valuable resources. Like, get your friends to read it, get them to tell you if they liked it, what parts they liked, because those are general readers and those opinions are really important. But you also still need to get someone trained to look at your work, especially if you're self-publishing.
Yeah, I also studied English literature in college. I mean, but I am curious to what the higher level degrees in publishing are like, to some degree. Anyway, we don't have to go too deep, right? But seeing as how you have the training.
Yeah, absolutely. So my undergraduate degree was a Bachelor of Art, so with a major in English and a minor in publishing. And then I took what I was calling a year off school between my undergrad and my master's degree. But during that year, I did an editing certificate program. So not really a year off school, but a year off, a formal degree program. And that was also through Simon Fraser University. So it's like a 12-class program on all different types of editing. And it's very, very specific editorial training, which is a lot different than an English undergrad, because with an English undergrad, you are studying literature. And you can point out things like metaphors and things like that from studying literature, but the editing specific training is so much more specific. And it's so important that an editor actually have that specific training. And then after that, I did the Master of Publishing program, which was a combination of editorial training as well as design, business practices, publishing trends, like everything. And that was a lot of fun. Really, really intense.
Sounds like it.
Bittersweet that it's over now. I'm just, next week, I'm going to be submitting my final paper to the library and have that published. And then it's done. But that for me was because I wanted to start my publishing company, though. Like, to be a freelance editor, the editing certificate was enough. And I do continually take professional development courses as well. I'm actually currently the co-chair for professional development for my provincial branch of Editors Association of Canada. So I help plan seminars. And in doing that, I get to attend most of the seminars for free, which is a great perk for volunteering. So I am always, keeping up to date on training and things. But the master's degree I took because I wanted to start my own publishing company. So it gave me that business training that I also needed in order to do that well.
Yes. Oh boy. I mean, I wish, because originally I was trying to be traditionally published. I was trying to get work with traditional publishers. And I kind of gave up on that because I was tired of the lag times and submissions and stuff. So it is interesting to me, though, that there's this kind of transition from the bigger centralized publishing to more diffuse publishing. Do you think that's true across, even in the, for publishers as well as authors individually?
What do you mean by diffused publishing?
Oh, it's spread out. There's more smaller ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what I understand, that's actually more prevalent in Canada than it is in the United States because of our government grant systems. Because we have quite a few grants that do support small publishing companies, less so in genre than in more literary publishers, but it's getting better. And that's kind of a focus of some of my academic research too, is that kind of dynamic in our industry and in our government. But yeah, it's really good to see all the small publishing companies. And I also work for a traveling bookstore, so we sell books at conventions across Canada. And it's called Mythhawker Traveling Bookstore. And we will only sell books from small publishers or independent authors. We specialize in the little guy, which is great. And what I see when I go to these conventions is you'll have, our table, which is selling books from a bunch of different publishers and a bunch of different authors. And then you'll also see a bunch of other tables that are publisher specific. You'll have Tyche next to Bundoran, next to Edge, next to, some other small publishers. And it's just great to see that, because they're all friends, right? Like, yeah. You think having all these publishers lined up in a row side by side, there would be, bloodshed, but they're all friends. They're all best friends. They all help each other out. If one person needs to run off and grab something to eat, the publisher next to them is like, oh yeah, I'll watch your table for you. And not only do they watch their table, but they will actively sell their books. Like if a customer comes up to that table, they're not going to try and sell their own books. They'll say, oh yeah, no, that's a great book. I've read that. I love that. They'll be back in 5 minutes and they can process that for you. And it's just great to see. I don't know if it's the same in the US, but I see this in Canada for sure. And just that community of all the small publishers working together and supporting each other. It's one of the reasons I wanted to and felt confident to start my own company, because I knew that even if I'm doing it on my own, I'm not really doing it on my own, because there's so much support with the small publishers in this community. It's great. Actually, my very first subscriber to the e-zine was the owner of Pulp Literature magazine, which is a local. They are also based in Vancouver. Short fiction magazine. Like by definition, we are competitors, but she was my first subscriber. Like there's just this community surrounding the small publishers, and it's great. I love it.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Now we are running a little low on time already, which is amazing. I mean, honestly, this has been a lot of fun. But as far as shifting gears, I would like to ask, especially because I meant to ask this a little sooner, honestly. But when because you're more of a reader and editor than most of my guests are, I've got to ask, what have you been reading lately, and what's especially stuff you can actually talk about, right? No, not just submissions and things. What kind of stuff are you reading, and what can you recommend to the audience?
One of my recent reads that I absolutely love is called Graveyard Mind by Chadwick Ginther. It's this great urban fantasy, and it is hilarious, and it's a really, really fun read. I read that while I was on vacation, and my whole family was trying to get me to, go do vacation activities, and I just shut them down. It's like, nope, I need to finish this book. It has, consumed me. And I'm actually in between books right now, but the next one on my list to read is Adrift by Rob Bofford. He's a local author. He publishes through Orbit in the UK. And I read his trilogy, and he has an Outer Earth trilogy, which was just amazing. And he has a standalone that came out last year. So that is next on my list to read.
Nice. No, those both sound fun, and especially the urban fantasy book. What was the name again? I'm sorry, I'm so bad.
Graveyard Mind.
Graveyard Mind.
And the author is Chadwick Ginther. All
right. Yeah. As for me in that regard, I did actually manage to finish reading a book recently myself. I'm so bad at it. I have ADHD, and it shows, especially when it comes to reading. I'm very bad at finishing books, but I did manage to finish reading Casino Royale by Ian Fleming, the first James Bond novel. just a few weeks ago. No, last week, whatever. And I thought it was really good. I mean, I really enjoyed the movie. I mean, which is quite close to the book actually, except that there's way more action in the movie as far as violence.
Yeah.
But as you might expect, because the book is actually trying to be a pulp spy novel instead of a pulp, action thriller thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very much a pulp story, old school, published I think in the 50s. Yeah, definitely. And so I really enjoyed that book. I thought it's also a lot bleaker than the movie, which is hard to believe almost because the movie is pretty dark for a James Bond movie. So it's an interesting story, and I was really pleased with it. Anyway, I thought I'd mention that as well. Moving on back to The Warded Man, probably pretty soon, the Peter V. Brett book, which is more my usual stomping grounds of big fantasy. So
yeah, big fantasy is great.
Yeah, so thanks for being on the show, Ellen.
Yeah,
where can people find you in your work, and where can people find the magazine and all the stuff, the e-zine? Yeah.
You can find it at constellatepub.ca. The e-zine is hosted on Patreon, so there'll be a link on the website through to the Patreon. And you can also use Constellate Pub on most social media, and you'll find me. But as for my personal social media, I use Twitter the most, which would be Ellen_MIC.
All right. Thanks for being on the show, Ellen. It's been fun.
Thanks. It's been great.
All right. And as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find my books on amazon.com. And of course, now you can find The Mangrove Suite, which is the first book in the Rain Protocol series. And you can also find Stormfleet, the first book in the Pillar Universe series, for free wherever fine ebooks are distributed, because people read the books and enjoy. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good one.
That tears it.